Hey all. Yeah, shut up. I know the title pun is bad. It's terrible. It reeks of cringe. I made it after all. But like, come on, man. You gotta give me a break. I need to change my video titles up somehow, and I'm just not that creative. I can't keep using the word good in every video title that I make. And yeah, the word cool is basically the same as the word good. Like, they both have two O's. But I didn't ask. We're taking a look at the Sickle today, which got buffed in the 1.4.4 update, and honestly got some really big changes. I think that this item was never horrendous, unlike another item that I just made a video about, but the Sickle is rather weak in Master Mode in my opinion, and how the weapon operates is just pretty outdated for the current version of the game, so it's been given some nice buffs to tune it up a little bit. We've got the Sickle. I'm just gonna read the buffs to you guys. We have a damage increase of 8 from 42 to 50. The range of the projectiles was increased by 50%. The projectile damage was reduced from 100% of the base damage to 50% of the base damage. The projectile was changed to use static frames and reduced the immune time between hits, which means that it deals damage slightly more often, and the projectile pierce count is reduced from 5 to 3. We've got some cool stuff here, starting off with the first two changes, which are more typical buffs. The damage increase is about 19%, which is good for all things, and the range extension is very important in my eyes for being able to actually clip bosses easier with the ice shard that the weapon fires, because having such limited range makes it difficult to get attacks in on bosses with very dynamic movement. These are powerful changes, but the next ones actually seem to put a slight damper on them. The projectile damage decrease reduces the effectiveness of the overall damage buff on the item, and the pierce count being reduced means that each projectile from the item can only pierce up to 3 enemies and can only hit up to 3 times. This all means that the projectile is now only doing base 25 damage per hit instead of 42, and is hitting 2 less times. So theoretically, you're getting a possible total base damage dealt of 75 damage per shard instead of 210, which seems like a massive drop, and you can see this demonstrated in my damage tests, where the Sickle after the buffs compared to the item in 1.3 does more damage in melee situations and significantly less when using only the projectile. I still think that the item is meant to be stronger overall, even in situations where you're only using the projectile, however, or it's at least meant to be more consistent, because the shards hitting more times means that you're more likely to hit the same enemy multiple times if it's moving through the ice shards quickly, which in my eyes is mostly a significant buff to the item when fighting against bosses, since all but one take no knockback whatsoever, and I would imagine could move through the Sickle's projectiles so quickly that you wouldn't really get many chances to actually utilize the higher piercing capabilities of the old version of the item. And now that you should be able to hit bosses more often, especially with the extra range, and the projectile using static immunity frames means if you do get in melee range of an enemy, or if you're using summons of some kind to aid with the fight, the projectile won't get in the way or miss hits anymore. Now, I haven't actually tested this theory on the previous iteration of the item, but I have had time to test the 1.4.4 version on a couple of the bosses that you're most likely to fight with this thing. Just a couple, because I haven't had the time to gather a lot of footage since it's the busy part of my week, but the results were rather promising, although yes, I think just about anything looks promising after having to fight these same bosses with the fucking beam sword. I'm using pretty much the same arenas and item setup that I used in that video, so go take a look at it if you want to see what I actually used, but it's just meant to be items that are balanced for this point in the game, aka the start of hard mode. We've got Queen Slime first, which is the first benchmark for a weapon in hard mode, and frankly, I had more trouble than I thought I'd have. The Sickle is a little awkward for this fight because the lack of range and relatively heavy knockback on the little slimes that the queen spawns makes it hard to get rid of them, and you often have to wait outside of the line of fire and just dodge until she comes to you and lets you hit her. The damage that the item does itself is adequate, especially when you can combine the melee and ranged attacks at once, and once you get the angle right in the second phase, hitting the queen slime while she's flying becomes quite easy. And I can say that I definitely feel the range increase in this part of the fight specifically, because looking at how the ice shards line up with her when firing, I can almost guarantee that they just wouldn't be able to reach the boss, or just barely clip her before the buffs, which could be a game changer for the item in this scenario. It ends up being a fairly long fight, but that's unsurprising considering this is Master Mode. Coming into the next test, the twins were something that I expected to be difficult, especially after going at them with a beam sword, because it's simply very hard to fight them with short-range weapons and items with slow projectiles, which are both traits held by the Sickle. It wasn't the cleanest fight by me, and the weapon is certainly still held back by aspects of its older design, but it's certainly not the worst. With a long arena like I have, you can get both of them to chase you in a linear fashion during their dash attacks, and this is the best time to land free shots and pile on damage. Spasmatism is who I always go for first because he's the easiest to kill. He is almost always staying parallel to or is dashing at you, so it's pretty easy to hit the Sickle's projectile on him. First stage Retinazer is also pretty easy to deal with, but when he changes form, the way that he moves makes it really hard to hit him, and falling away from him and making him chase you while firing is generally the best way I found to make him consistently run into the ice shards. It came really close, though it was just bad movement that ended up almost killing me, and I think that the Sickle actually handles the twins quite decently. As I mentioned, I didn't test on other bosses, though I'd wager that this would do similarly against Skeletron Prime, and will be alright against the Destroyer too because it does pierce, but I think the weapon performs fine, and while not amazing, feels much better mechanically at fighting the bosses that you're forced to deal with at the start of hard mode than it did before. I've always liked the design of the Sickle. It's a fairly unique item, the only other one similar in concept off the top of my head being the Death Sickle, which is another item I love. I'm glad that it got some cool changes. That's going to be all for the video though. Got a lot more on the way, and I'll see you next time.